Well, welcome back, everybody. This is not exactly how I thought I would be delivering this message, but of course, here we are due to the situation with the coronavirus. So, today, what I'll do is I'll make a very brief statement and explain chapter 8 very quickly. And this is kind of how we'll wrap up chapter 8. Going forward next week, I may post 2 lectures as opposed to just one really short one. But this is kind of where we are in the situation. So be sure to always check Canvas. Be sure to always check any announcements I may post on Canvas. Check your email. Be sure to actually engage each other in the discussions that I create on Canvas as well. But going forward, I'll make sure that I post a video lecture such as this one or like this one. And then I'll make sure I create all the assignments, and you should get those notifications through Canvas. You'll have discussions you'll have to engage with your fellow students, and make sure you complete your assignments. If you have any questions, of course, you can email me or stop by my office. I will be in my office as well if you are on campus. I know many of you are not and will not come back, so that's kind of where we are. But if you need me, you can reach me through my email. But what we're going to do is we're going to just take a quick look through chapter 8. It won't take us very long. Be sure to read chapter 8 and be sure to know that information for your final exam. So let's get started. So chapter 8 covers the topic of television. Television is the industry of which I spent most of my time as an employee. I worked for several television stations in the Midwest, Joplin, Missouri, Louisville, Kentucky, and also here in St. Louis at KMOV Channel 4 local news station. So it's a broadcast media where I came from, but television as a whole is where my background was in. So this is kind of the chapter we're going through, and I'll go through that really quickly. If someone said to me, what are the most 3 important moments in television history, I would point to 3 things that kind of stick out to me. It would be the Kennedy-Nixon debate. It would also be the Vietnam War, and it would also be the moon landing. So those 3 are 3 big and major events that happened throughout society and throughout history in the United States that just kind of shaped television and just were big moments. The Nixon-Kennedy debate was one that comes to mind because it was the first presidential debate that was actually televised. And if you actually listen to that debate on the radio, people would have said Richard Nixon absolutely obliterated John F. Kennedy. But if you watched on television, you had the opposite response because you actually saw how Richard Nixon looked. And one of the defining moments of the debate was the lights, much like the lights in the studio that we have here. The lights were so bright that they were hot as well. They made Richard Nixon sweat. So that was just one defining moment from that particular debate. Also, the Vietnam War. That was a war that was actually pretty much televised. Correspondents went to Vietnam and made daily and weekly reports and brought that information back to the United States. And also the moon landing. I mean, think about how monumentous as that was to land individuals on the moon. So those are 3 big important moments in television history. If someone said to me today, what is the most important thing that's going on television right now? What's the biggest moment? I think we all will have the same response. Of course, it's the coronavirus situation. So that has kind of plagued the hearts, the minds, the lives of all Americans here in this country and also across the globe as well, right? That's the one thing that you are gonna see when you turn on television. That's the one thing that everyone's talking about, whether you like it or not. That's just kind of one of the big moments that's happening on television. So much like all of the lectures and medium we go through, I want to give you just a quick short history. It's going to be very quick, nothing too complicated. But I just want to give you a short history about television. You're going to read through the book and you're going to run to a quote that says that television is the most influential media since the printing press. That was just a quote from the author of the book. And I thought that was a pretty good quote that I wanted to share with you guys. Right? So if you think about the golden age of radio, which was the 1940s and the 1930s, the golden age of television would have been the 1950s and the 1960s when radio was coming out of its golden age and the advent and the birth of television happens in the 1950s and 1960s. There are 2 individuals that I want you to remember, very old individuals, but they actually helped create what we know as the television. One guy by the name of Nipkow and the other guy by the name of Farnsworth. Now, Farnsworth is the one who's given credit for creating the television. At age 21, he transmitted the first picture on television. And in the 1930s, he patented the first electronic television. Those are just 2 names I want you guys to remember. Let's just talk about a few early stats. In 1948, only 1% of households had a television. In 1953, 50% of households actually had televisions in them. In 1960, 90% of households had televisions in them. Some places were actually afraid that because of the advent of television, that places was started to lose attendance, much like movie theaters and cafes and theater performances, much like anything that comes on the scene as a new medium. A lot of people flock to that thing. So other avenues and mediums were afraid that they were going to lose revenue in business: radio, paper, books, you name it, right? So some feared that radio, books, newspapers, and magazines will become less relevant because of television. But of course, as we know today, radio, books, newspapers, magazines, theater, movies, they all coexist. So there was no reason to be afraid that these things would actually lose attendance or lose popularity. Of course, that's what some thought, but that was just not the case, of course. So that was kind of one of the fears. There were 4 events from the 1950s that would primarily shape how television operated. Those are 4 major events that you'll read about in the book, but also I want to mention those to you just kind of quickly. The first of which is the quiz show scandal. Back in the early 1950s, there was a quiz show, and it was actually rigged. It was actually something that was pretty scandalous back in the day. We probably wouldn't think too much about it now, but this quiz show that went on was actually rigged. There was also the I Love Lucy show. If you think about I Love Lucy, CBS asked Lucy to make her radio show into a television show. Now think about this. Lucille Ball with her husband, Desi Arnaz, would be the first interracial couple on television, right? So, and they wanted it to be edited together so it could be a clean, seamless show. Also, going forward, thinking about things like McCarthyism. Many of you may be familiar with who Joseph McCarthy is and familiar with what McCarthyism was. Also, think about how the radio gauge how many people listen to the radio programs. They use Nielsen ratings. Much television used those ratings as well. The idea of measuring an audience was carried over from radio to television. So that's important to know as well. Now, this is the big question. There's a lot of things I'd like to get into throughout this lecture, but of course I can't because of time constraints with videos and file sizes. But this is the question, right? We're thinking right where we are right now. Is television dead? Now, I know that's a big question. That's a huge question. That's a question that can go either way. Some could say yes and argue for that, and some could say no and argue for that. But that is the question. Is television dead? And the reason why I asked that question is because if you think back to when the Cleveland Cavaliers played the Golden State Warriors on live television on ABC when that finals happened. Now, that was actually streamed on the ESPN app to more than 400,000 people. I know that doesn't sound like a large number because 20 million people watched it on television, but think about the magnitude of television being streamed on laptops, cell phones, tablets, whatever it may be, to 400,000 people, right? So is television dying? I think if I had to answer that question, I would say television is not dying. It's actually being transformed into something more new and current, right? Much like the definition for convergence, right? The erosion of traditional distinctions amongst media. So that's exactly what's happening with television. So think about it. So people are now using television in a different way, right? They're still watching television, much like myself. I watch television, but I use Hulu. I use Netflix to actually watch the television shows when I want to watch them. I watch ESPN on my, the ESPN app, right? So I'm still watching television, but I watch it a different way. So I don't think television is dying, but I think television is transforming. And that's the only way you can actually survive if you want to exist in this current time period, right? So think about this in relation to convergence. Cord cutting, that's a very important term I want you all to know. It kind of relates to what I just talked about a second ago. I cut my cord in relation to cable, right? So cord cutting speaks to cable. So viewers leaving cable altogether and relying on internet only television. I cut my cable a long time ago because that was not serving me any purpose, and I didn't want to continue to pay the bill for the cable because I knew I could get all my shows that I was watching anyway at a much cheaper rate, much like on Hulu, right? Hulu's very cheap. Netflix is very cheap, right? So I decided to cut the cord. I don't have a DVR or anything like that, but I went the Netflix route. So cord cutting, right? I know I'm going pretty quick through this whole thing, but I wanted to get this wrapped up in a short amount of time. So this is what I want to know from you. I'm going to create a discussion. I want you to answer this question. What is the future of television? Give me a 1-paragraph response to what the future of television is going to look like in your opinion. I want to know your thoughts. That's the conclusion of this lecture. I'll post many more lectures going forward. So stay tuned, check Canvas, check your email. But if you need anything, please send me an email. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you.